Welcome back to Seeker Strength, Seeker Stan, and Philosophy with an F with the fridge. So I haven't done one of these in a while because I only do them when I've been thinking about stuff for a while. And today's one is a little bit of an interesting one. There's kind of a lot to it, so it's not really a quick soundbite or quick kind of consumable information. So I'd recommend maybe going have a look at a few things. But you're probably aware of a lot of this stuff if you're active on social media and YouTube, and you probably watch the other channels that are so kind of related to ours. So recently, Mark Bell and Nsima on the Powercast talked about James Smith calling out Liver King.
Yeah, he got called out by James Smith, who recently I had an opportunity to hang out with when I was in London.
Sure. When you hear hooves, think horses, not zebras. For decades now, we've seen athletes, in quotes, fill themselves up to the brim with anabolic steroids, then conveniently point to their supplement stack, which you can buy now and swipe up. Don't see why this is any different, bar the fact that this geezer eats raw testicles. Guy's got a banging chest and beard combo, but he's about as legit at with his word as Matt Hancock. I could be wrong, but I doubt it.
Now, obviously, I'm going to put all of these in the title because we all want to play the algorithm, whether we want to admit it or not, and we always admit it. So, speaking of algorithm, if you want to leave one of those comments below, it does help. So, James Smith, he is a PT, motivational speaker, lifestyle book writer. Our boy Zach Talander was on his podcast recently. And James Smith called out this dude called Brian Johnson, aka the Liver King. Now, the Liver King gentleman is what would you call him? A man who is a proponent of the kind of carnivore lifestyle, ancestral lifestyle. He sells a kind of a lifestyle, or he promotes a lifestyle. I shouldn't really say sell, maybe I should say sell, but he uses a lifestyle of, you know, eating nose to tail, something which I've made no secret of talking about myself. But you come see in a minute that we're not really just talking about Liver King, we're just going to talk about all of this as a whole. So he makes he eats raw eggs, he eats raw liver, testicle. He's in incredible shape. I'll pop something up on the screen there. And as far as I'm aware, he claims natural or heavily avoids talking about being natural. James Smith made a post essentially saying that obviously, you know, he believes him to be not natty, on a load of gear. Now, if you asked myself and Fitz were talking about this, if you looked at Brian Johnson, the Liver King, if you looked at him, you were like, of course he's on gear. You'd be like, he's almost certainly on performance-enhancing drugs. But I kind of wanted to talk about first is why we actively don't call out other coaches. We don't do things like this. So after this post, Mark Bell and Nsima talked about a couple of interesting points, and I want to get to those as well. But I'm first going to talk about something that we've never really explicitly said on the channel in terms of a video in its own right. But it's something we said multiple times. So a lot of you guys, regular viewers, will know you've asked us stuff like, can you talk about knees over toes, guy? Can you talk about Joel Seedman and any number of other coaches out there? Anytime we do an MMA video, you'll talk about this. I think it's Phil Daru. And you'll ask us to kind of dissect their methods. You know, and a lot of time, at the moment, for example, Squat University is getting a lot of negative feedback in some of his comments and videos, and a lot of times people ask us about this, and we've made a distinct point of avoiding calling out other coaches or doing anything that would be directly vicious or directly attacking another coach and their methods. Now, we definitely do those reaction videos. We really like to use those primarily as teaching videos. You know, it's great to have something in context, and we often say we don't have context on why someone is doing this. For example, with the Harry Aiken sprinting video, Harry himself commented on the video, said he appreciated how nice, how humble we were in regards to it, and we were just taking that stuff from face value and talking about what might this do for a sprinter or a rugby player or a judoka or whatever we've done. So we make a heavy point of not essentially tearing down other coaches. Now, we've come close sometimes for sure. We've done the stuff where, you know, for example, some of the doping stuff for about certain teams, or for example, the issue with Joel Seedman when he's on Mark Bell talking about the science. Again, we didn't really comment on Joel Seedman's methods, just talking about some of the tactics he used to make his argument, which is something that a lot of people do, and again, wasn't really specifically about Joel Seedman. What we really believe in way of teaching people is negativity will only get you so far and eventually will burn out. What we really think is if you believe you know better, then you put that content up yourself like we do. You make a podcast, you make a YouTube, you make an Instagram page, You talk about that content and you believe you talk about the way that's better. Now, in terms of James Smith and the Liver King, Mark Bell, we're not really involved in their side of things. We deal with athletes and people with performance exclusively. But the idea is the same. If you think you know better than someone, and that's kind of what's implied in these scenarios. When James Smith talks about the Liver King, for example, and his non-playable characters start commenting on the Instagram posts, talking about, you know, oh, he doesn't know anything about ancestral diets. There's like some dude called the fitness coach or the fitness chef or something. It's implied that they know better. And I think there's a great quote from Ernest Hemingway, and I'm sure you've heard it. There's nothing noble in being superior to your fellow man. True nobility is being superior to your fellow self, or your former self, I should say. So obviously that's what we try and do, is just keep educating people and not really tear other people down. If James Smith feels, and he's quite a prolific with this, but a lot of people do it. For example, the biggest fitness channel at the moment, More Plates, More Dates, exclusively makes a living off calling other people out. And for some reason never receives backlash to it, which I thought was very interesting. Maybe because he just seems like a really nice Canadian. But we have this scenario where we're just aggressively, and a lot of people involved in this space just aggressively try to bring other people down, but in reality it's not really benefiting anyone. It's certainly getting you a number of clicks, but as a, suppose, the fitness industry as a whole, and we're certainly involved in that, although maybe not the fitness part, well, I'm not anyway, maybe Fitz is when he does a run, but we're not really involved, or we're all certainly involved in this area, and it doesn't really benefit people as a whole to negatively talk about someone else's matters. Now, I'm sure these gentlemen involved, and it's primarily gentlemen, would say they're trying to dissuade negative information, but it doesn't really end up coming across like that. Really what it ends up coming across as a superior or holier than thou method. So I think, and what we will continue to do hopefully, is just put out what we think is the correct information, and then let people buy into our argument, listen to our reasoning, and make conscious decisions themselves based on what we're saying. Not really, I suppose, not really judging the people involved in this. That would be pretty ironic, I suppose, making this video and then judging them for their actions. I'm just saying it's kind of where we come at this from this direction, is that we don't want to do this, and it's, I think, a better method for most people to involved is to look at the positives, put out your good information yourself, and then let people decide. And I think ultimately, and it seems to be going that direction in the last 20 odd years in the fitness industry, better quality information does rise to the top. Like we were saying, for example, when we're talking about the T-Nation days or any of those other poor source information, I think really slowly we're heading in that right direction. The second thing I wanted to talk about is relation to Nsima, is the co-host with Mark Bell, and he's talking about how it's impossible to prove your natty or not status.
Is even when people see how normal all my levels are, the next thing is going to be like, okay, well, you definitely cycled off. And then if there's some way to, maybe if I took blood tests every month and people were seeing that I'm not cycling anything, you took steroids when you were younger, and you have the effects of those steroids you took when you were younger. There's literally nothing that I can do, or nothing that he can do if he is actually natural. There's nothing somebody that's natural can do if people believe they're on steroids, because there's always something else that can be proven that'll show that you did do something.
And I think it's quite interesting. So there is a philosophical argument known as Russell's teapot, or the celestial teapot, where the onus is on the individual to make this unfalsifiable, to prove that your claim is correct, not on your unfalsifiable claim to be disproved by other individuals. So for example, Russell's teapot, or the celestial teapot, is, I would say to Fitz, for example, I have launched the teapot into orbit between Earth and Mars, and it's orbiting there, and it's your job to prove that it's not there. It's not my job to prove that it's there. Now, Nsima was talking about a section where he's been getting his blood work done, but he doesn't really know at what bounds would he stop before people would stop calling him out. In reality, it's an unprovable scenario. If people have decided you're not natty, they will go to any length to essentially decide if you are not natty. So he talked about once a month wouldn't be enough. People make claims that you could certainly take other things, which you could for sure. They're somewhat correct in arguments to say that if Nsima claims he's natty and he does drug tests once a month, they'll make one argument. If he says he'll do them every week, they'll make another argument. We saw a similar thing with Matt Does Fitness when he was on More Plates, More Dates. There's a more specific analogy for that. It's called the Dragon in the Garage. It's from Carl Sagan's book, A Demon Haunted World. So I'd say, for example, to Fitz, I was like, Fitz, I have a pet dragon. And Fitz would say, obviously, show me your fucking pet dragon. I would say, oh, he's actually invisible. And then Fitz would say, okay, I'm going to throw flour on the ground to see his footprints. And I'd be like, oh, actually, the dragon is floating. And then Fitz would say, does he breathe fire? And I'd say, sure. And then Fitz would say, I don't feel the heat off the fire. And would say, it's actually invisible fire that produces no heat. So we continue going on with this unprovable, unfinishable argument. There's no way of disproving that my dragon isn't there because I keep coming up with certain values or further arguments. And that's the same with, for example, what Nsima was talking about. He was saying, no matter what I do to prove I'm natural, people will still keep questioning whether I'm natural. And the argument from Carl Sagan's point of view, or the demon in the garage, or the dragon in the garage, is what's the difference between this unprovable dragon and no dragon at all? Does it matter if Nsima is natural, if the information he puts out is good? So that kind of brings me on to the last point, and that is it disingenuous if, for example, we'll just take the Liver King, because there's numerous examples of this, but it's a hot topic at the moment, or he's certainly blowing up on Instagram. Is the information he's putting out somehow tainted if he is claiming not natural, doing other nefarious activities that would affect the lifestyle he is selling? So on paper, you would argue that good information is good information regardless of what that person is doing. So if a criminal says a true fact, that does not affect the fact of what he's saying, the honesty or the truthness of that, regardless of his other actions. Now, I'm not saying Brian Johnson is a criminal for taking performance-enhancing drugs, but you understand the idea. The information might be correct, but it somehow feels wrong. So if we look at, for example, James Smith involved in this, or the other, his kind of people in the comments who support them, all of those are talking about he's shilling stuff for making money. But the irony of that is that James himself is making money, and more power to him. Myself and Fitz, we're a business for a reason. We absolutely want to make money and make, we don't hide it. Fitz has a lot of money. Woohoo! So in this scenario where we have James Smith sells a lifestyle similar to what Brian Johnson sells. So James Smith obviously doesn't sell a lifestyle where he eats raw testicle, but he sells a lifestyle of you can become a personal coach, you can have a body and enjoy your lifestyle. We could all make arguments against everything that everyone is selling. There is a dude in his comments, the fitness chef I mentioned, Graham Tomlinson, talking about how you can eat junk food and still be a healthy weight, or keep it low calories, for example. He also has a post saying, your appearance has nothing to do with your value to others. Anyone who shames or judges your appearance is simply projecting their own insecurities onto you. Even though he made a comment, funnily enough, deriding the Liver King for being a manly man. So it's just funny. I think on paper you would say with Brian Johnson information, if you tried it yourself, and loads of people do try this kind of thing, this kind of carnivore lifestyle, and they get positive benefits. I'm sure loads of people try James Smith's activities and get loads of benefits. I'm sure loads of people try the fitness chef's activities and get loads of benefits. I think if you look at, for example, the Liver King's selling points, or the information he's putting out there, but if we're primarily focused on his physique, which he doesn't seem to push too much, although obviously he's topless in a lot of videos because he's playing the algorithm, as we all do. But I think, for example, if you're an experienced member, you'll say, look, he's more than likely on drugs. And I would certainly agree with you. It's almost certainly on some form of performance-enhancing drugs. But when you look at that, if you're experienced enough to see that from the get-go, there's kind of two options. If he's natural, you'll know your genetics are able for that or not. You'll know. It'll be very, very obvious to you if your genetics are able for that. So it's relevant to you. If he's not natural, you'll understand if you yourself are not natural, and you'll say, I could take performance enhancing drugs and look similar to him, or I'm going to choose not to. So then you're left with the option to use his information or not use it. From our point of view, I would say in regards to this, it feels wrong to not talk about it, which is why we always mention in our videos about S&C. As we know, in S&C world and performance and athletics, there's a huge amount of performance enhancing drugs. And they kind of talk about this also in Mark Bell's podcast. They say they don't believe that it can be as prevalent as people say it is, but unfortunately or fortunately, or just net negatively or net breaking even, whatever you want to call it, in an emotional sense or moral sense, it is highly prolific across the vast majority of sports, and if anything, will become more prolific. So that's why we try and include it in when we're talking about things. You know, when we talk about sports, we say sometimes if something looks a little bit strange, we're like, this is probably related to drugs, and this is why this piece of training makes its way around the elite athletes, but for example, probably won't work for you. So at the end of the day, I don't really know what I'm arguing for in terms of the Liver King selling his stuff. I like some of the stuff. James Smith seems like a cool guy. Zach seems like him. Mark Bell and Nsima seems like pretty cool people. Everyone's just trying to put the information out there. We prefer not to deride other people, and I hope that's what's coming across here, is that we're not trying to do that or doing that in particular. But, you know, it would be a better scenario, and I agree with Mark, is that if less people were calling out other people, I suppose, on the internet and putting out better information, I think overall it would end up more positive. Ultimately, we just wanted to talk about this because it's not something we've said explicitly about why we don't talk about other coaches, and there's a few other things that I was thinking about. So I hope you've gained something from this. Probably haven't, but enjoy your evening if you have, or if you haven't. It's all the same.